Maid whispers in priest's ear, and he calls off the wedding on the spot. Jennifer Miller adjusted her veil one last time as tears of happiness smudged her makeup. At 25, she was finally fulfilling her dream of marrying Michael, the man she had loved for 3 years. St. Michael's Church was packed with guests, white flowers adorned every pew, and the organ played the wedding march that echoed through the centuries-old walls of Aspen. That's when Margaret Johnson, the maid who had worked for the Miller family for over 2 decades, quietly approached Father Richard. Her steady steps contrasted with the trembling in her hands as she whispered something in his ear that made the clergyman instantly pale. "I interrupt this ceremony," declared Father Richard with a trembling voice, raising his right hand. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer felt her heart stop for a second, while Michael stepped forward, confused. "Father, what's going on?" "What's?" asked Michael, his voice echoing through the now completely silent church. "I cannot proceed with this union. Matters of conscience prevent me," replied the priest, avoiding looking directly at the couple. Mrs. Linda Miller, the bride's mother, abruptly rose from her seat in the front row, her face red with indignation. "What is this nonsense?" "Margaret, what did you say to the priest?" shouted Linda, pointing at the maid. Margaret remained silent, her eyes fixed on the ground. At 50 years old, she had kept secrets for far too long, and now that she had spoken, she felt an immense weight being lifted from her shoulders, but also the terror of what would come next. "I cannot explain here in front of everyone," murmured Margaret, her voice almost inaudible. Jennifer descended the altar steps with difficulty, the weight of her wedding dress seeming to triple with each step. "Margaret, you've known me since I was a child. Please tell me what's going on," begged Jennifer, tears now streaming freely down her face. Father Richard looked at the crowd of confused guests and murmured, "I ask everyone to leave. We need a private moment in the sacristy." "No one leaves here until this is cleared up," exclaimed Linda, stomping her foot on the church's marble floor. Michael held Jennifer's hand, feeling it tremble. "Margaret, whatever it is, we can resolve it after the ceremony," said Michael, trying to remain calm. "No, Michael, we cannot," replied Margaret, finally raising her eyes. "What I have to say changes everything. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Father Richard gestured for everyone to follow him to the sacristy. Jennifer walked as if in a nightmare, still unable to process what was happening. Michael kept his arm around her shoulders, but his own thoughts were confused. In the sacristy, only the couple, Margaret, Linda, and the priest gathered. The small, stuffy room intensified the tension. "Margaret, you've worked for our family for 22 years. Please explain this," said Linda, her voice now more controlled but still filled with anger. Margaret took a deep breath and looked directly at Jennifer. "Jennifer, I am not just your maid. I am your sister." The silence that followed seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Jennifer blinked several times, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "What did you say?" whispered Jennifer. "I was born in 1974, the daughter of Robert Miller and Sarah Williams. I was given up for adoption when I was 2 because your mother couldn't accept me," continued Margaret, each word coming out like a stab. Linda staggered and had to lean against the wall. "That's a lie. Robert never told me about any daughter," protested Linda, but her voice no longer sounded convincing. "Because he was afraid of losing you," replied Margaret. "But I have all the documents, birth certificate, adoption papers. I kept everything all these years." Michael looked from one to the other, trying to understand how this would affect his marriage. "Even if this is true, I don't see why we can't get married," said Michael. Margaret looked at him with an expression of deep sadness. "Because you are also the son of Robert Miller, Michael. You are half-siblings." The revelation hit Michael like a bolt of lightning. He let go of Jennifer's hand and took 2 steps back. "That's impossible." "My father was John Wilson," said Michael, his voice faltering. "John Wilson was the one who raised you, but Robert Miller is your biological father. Your mother, Susan, had an affair with him before marrying John," explained Margaret. Jennifer collapsed into a chair, her wedding dress spreading around her like a white cloud stained by tears. "How do you know all this?" asked Linda, now visibly shaken. Because I spent the last 10 years investigating. When I started working at your house, I noticed similarities between Jennifer and me. Later, when Michael started dating Jennifer, I noticed he had the same eyes as Mr. Robert, said Margaret. Father Richard, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Margaret came to me last night. She brought documents, certificates. I spent the night verifying everything. I couldn't allow this marriage to happen. Michael ran his hands through his hair, ruining the hairstyle that had taken hours to perfect. Where is my mother now? Can Susan confirm this? Asked Michael, desperate. Your mother passed away 5 years ago, Michael, but she left letters. Letters that have been with me all this time, revealed Margaret. Why did you keep these letters? How did you get them? Asked Jennifer, her voice hoarse from crying. Because Susan came to me before she passed. She knew who I was, knew I worked at the Miller house. She gave me the letters and asked me to make a decision when the time came, explained Margaret. Linda approached Margaret, her face a mix of anger and despair. Robert is in New York on business. I'll call him right now, said Linda, picking up her phone with trembling hands. Mrs. Linda, there's no use denying it. I have proof of everything, said Margaret calmly. Michael looked at Jennifer, who was still sitting, lost in her thoughts. Jennifer, I didn't know. You believe I didn't know, right? Said Michael, kneeling beside her. Jennifer looked at him through her tears. I know you didn't know, but now everything has changed, hasn't it? Whispered Jennifer. Linda's phone rang. It was Robert returning her call. Robert, you need to come back now. Margaret said she's your daughter. And that Michael is too. Linda spoke into the phone, her voice breaking. Even from a distance, everyone could hear the silence on the other end of the line. Robert, are you there? Insisted Linda. I'll come back. Don't say anything until I get there, was all Robert managed to say before hanging up. Margaret took a deep breath. There are more things you need to know, but perhaps it's better to wait for Mr. Robert to arrive. No, said Jennifer, suddenly standing up. I want to know everything now. I can't take any more lies. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then continued. I have a daughter, Jennifer. You have a niece you never knew. She's 16 years old and in her senior year of high school. The revelation fell like another weight on Jennifer's already burdened shoulders. A niece, murmured Jennifer. Where is she? Living with my aunt in Boulder. I see her on weekends. I work here to pay for her studies, explained Margaret. Michael, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Margaret, why did you never tell any of this before? Why wait until today? Because I was afraid, admitted Margaret. Afraid of losing my job, afraid of destroying the family. But when I saw the two of you falling in love, when I saw the wedding invitations being sent out, I couldn't stay silent any longer. Linda put away her phone and looked at Margaret with an expression that mixed resentment and curiosity. If you really are Robert's daughter, why did he give you up for adoption? Asked Linda. Because when I was born, you had already been together for 2 years. Robert was afraid to tell you about the affair he had with my mother, explained Margaret. My birth mother, Sarah Williams, was a housekeeper in the home of a family friend. Robert was young, confused about his feelings for you. It was a difficult time in his life. Jennifer wiped her tears with the back of her hands. And your mother? What happened to her? Asked Jennifer. She tried to raise me alone for 2 years, but the situation became unbearable. Robert offered financial help, but she preferred that I be adopted by a family that could give me a better life, recounted Margaret. Father Richard spoke up again. Margaret showed me letters exchanged between Robert and her birth mother. There are also records of bank transfers made by Robert to Margaret's adoptive family until she turned 18. Michael ran his hand over his face. Does that mean my father, John, didn't know either? Asked Michael. John knew you weren't his biological son, but Susan never told him who the real father was. He loved you as if you were his own son, explained Margaret. It was only years later, when Susan fell ill, that she sought me out and told me the whole truth. Jennifer stood up and walked to the small window of the sacristy. So all these years you've been taking care of me, knowing we were sisters? Asked Jennifer without turning around. Yes, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, admitted Margaret. Watching you grow up, celebrating your achievements, comforting you when you were sad, and not being able to hug you like a sister would. Jennifer turned around, her face red with emotion. You know me better than anyone in this room. You comforted me when I failed the college entrance exam, helped me choose my prom dress, gave me advice about Michael. Jennifer stopped, realizing the irony of the situation. You gave me advice about Michael knowing he was my brother. I tried to subtly discourage the relationship at first, but you both seemed so happy. I thought maybe I was wrong about Michael. It was only when I saw the marriage proposal that I knew I had to investigate further, said Margaret. Michael sat in a chair and put his head in his hands. My whole life has been a lie, murmured Michael. No, Michael. The love John had for you was real. The love you feel for Jennifer is real, just... Margaret hesitated. Just not the love of a husband for a wife. Linda, who had remained silent for a few minutes, finally spoke. Margaret, if you really are Robert's daughter, then you are my stepdaughter. And if what you're saying about Michael is true, then I have a stepson I didn't even know about. That's exactly right, Mrs. Linda, confirmed Margaret. Jennifer sat back down. So now we're a family, just like that, all of a sudden? Asked Jennifer, a bitter tone in her voice. Jennifer, I know it's difficult. I'm trying to process all this too, said Margaret. But it's the truth. Father Richard checked his watch. Robert should be on his way. Perhaps it's best if we wait for him to arrive before we continue this conversation. No, said Michael, raising his head. I need to know something, Margaret, your daughter, my niece. Does she know about all this? She knows I was adopted and that I'm looking for my biological family. But she doesn't know the details, replied Margaret. Jennifer stood up again, this time with determination. I want to meet her, my niece. What's her name? Asked Jennifer. Emma. Emma Johnson Miller. She's a brilliant girl. She's a high school senior and dreams of becoming a doctor, said Margaret, a small smile appearing on her face for the first time that day. Medicine, repeated Linda. Robert always wanted to be a doctor but had to drop out to take care of the family business. Michael looked at Jennifer. Jennifer, I know all this is confusing and painful, but you can still move forward. You're young, beautiful, smart. You can rebuild your life, said Michael. And you? What are you going to do? Asked Jennifer. I need to find out who I really am. I need to meet my half-siblings if there are others. I need to understand my story, replied Michael. Margaret looked at the two of them. There's one more thing you need to know about Robert. He has other children. Linda looked at Margaret with wide eyes. Other children? How many? Asked Linda. 2. A 28-year-old daughter and a 32-year-old son, both from relationships he had before marrying you, Mrs. Linda, revealed Margaret. How do you know this? Asked Linda, her voice growing weaker. Because I looked for them. They know about me, and now they know about Michael too. They wanted to be here today, but I asked them to wait, explained Margaret. Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, realizing the family they thought they knew was much larger and more complicated than they imagined. They want to meet us? Asked Michael. Yes, especially Stephanie, the oldest. She always knew she had more siblings out there. Daniel, the youngest, was more hesitant, but agreed to meet, said Margaret. Jennifer wiped away a new wave of tears. So now I have 3 siblings I didn't know about and a niece? Asked Jennifer. And I discovered I have 3 sisters and a niece, added Michael. Linda walked over to the window. Robert will have a lot of explaining to do when he arrives, murmured Linda. Margaret hesitated before continuing. Mrs. Linda, there's one more thing. About you and Mr. Robert. Linda turned quickly. What about us? Asked Linda. Robert never stopped loving you. All the affairs he had were before you got married, or were desperate attempts to forget a difficult period in your marriage, explained Margaret. What difficult period? Asked Linda. Jennifer and Michael were also paying attention, realizing there were still secrets to be revealed. When you lost the baby 15 years ago, Robert was desperate and withdrew. That's when he had the affair with Stephanie's mother, said Margaret carefully. Linda closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I remember that period, Robert would disappear for days, said he was working, murmured Linda. He was suffering as much as you, but didn't know how to deal with the pain. The other children were born from relationships he had during this confusing period, explained Margaret. Jennifer looked at her mother. Mom, you lost a baby. You never told me that, said Jennifer. It was before you were born. It would have been your older brother, said Linda, tears beginning to stream down her face. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Michael approached Linda. Linda, can I call you Mother? Because in a way, that's what you've always been to me, even without knowing, said Michael. Linda looked at Michael, and for the first time since the truth had been revealed, smiled through her tears. Of course you can, Michael. You were always welcome in our home, said Linda, embracing Michael. Jennifer watched the scene and felt a confusing mix of emotions. The man she had loved as her fiancé would now be her brother. The woman she knew as the housekeeper was her sister. The family she thought she knew was completely different. The sound of a horn interrupted the moment. Robert had arrived. He's here, announced Linda. Margaret took a deep breath. Now he'll have to face the consequences of his choices, said Margaret. Hurried footsteps echoed through the church corridor until Robert Miller appeared at the sacristy door. At 55, he was still an imposing man, but at that moment, he seemed to have aged 10 years. Margaret, were the first words he said, looking directly at her. Father, replied Margaret, the words sounding strange in her mouth. Robert looked around the room, seeing the shaken faces of his wife, his daughter, and Michael. I always knew this day would come, admitted Robert. Why did you never tell me? Asked Linda, her voice filled with hurt. Because I was afraid of losing you. Because I didn't know how to explain that I had other children. Because each day that passed without telling made it harder to reveal the truth, replied Robert. Jennifer stood up and faced her father. Father, you made me fall in love with my own brother. How could you allow that? Asked Jennifer. I didn't know about Michael until this morning, when Margaret called me, said Robert. I knew about the other children, but Michael, Susan never told me I was his father. Michael stepped forward. So you knew my mother? Asked Michael. Susan worked at the office where I interned during college. We had a brief relationship before I married Linda. When she told me she was pregnant, I offered help, but she said John would take responsibility, explained Robert. And you just accepted that? Asked Michael, a note of anger in his voice. I was young, Michael. I was about to marry Linda. Susan seemed sure it was the best option for everyone, said Robert. Margaret watched the conversation in silence, then spoke. Mr. Robert, Stephanie and Daniel want to meet Jennifer and Michael, and I want everyone to meet Emma. Robert nodded. I know, I spoke with them on the drive back. They'll come to Aspen next weekend, said Robert. Linda approached her husband. Robert, how many more secrets are you keeping? Asked Linda. No more, Linda, I promise. These are all the children I have, and now that everything is revealed, we can try to be a real family, said Robert. Jennifer laughed bitterly. A family? Father, my fiancé is my brother. My housekeeper is my sister. I have siblings I've never seen in my life. How can that be a family? Questioned Jennifer. Because it's the family we have, replied Margaret calmly, and we can choose what to do with this truth. Michael looked at Jennifer. Jennifer, I know it's difficult for me too, but maybe we can find a way to turn this into something positive, said Michael. How? Asked Jennifer. I don't know yet, but I know you're the most important person in my life. If I can't love you as a husband, I can love you as a brother. I can protect you, support you, always be by your side, said Michael. Jennifer looked at him through her tears. It's strange to hear that. For 3 years I loved you one way, and now I have to learn to love you another, said Jennifer. Father Richard, who had observed everything in silence, finally spoke. Sometimes God places us in situations that test our capacity to love unconditionally. Perhaps this is one of those moments, said the priest. Robert looked at Margaret. Margaret, can you forgive me for not having looked for you? For not bringing you home from the beginning? Asked Robert. Father, I spent a long time being angry. But after I had Emma, I understood that sometimes circumstances force us to make difficult decisions, replied Margaret. Tell me about Emma, about my granddaughter, requested Robert. She is everything to me, smart, determined, dreams of being a doctor. She has your eyes and Linda's smile, said Margaret, her face lighting up. Linda approached Margaret. Margaret, I know I can't erase all these years, but if you're willing, I would like to get to know my stepdaughter and granddaughter better, said Linda. I would like that, Mrs. Linda, replied Margaret. Jennifer observed the interaction between her mother and her sister. Margaret, all these years, you watched me grow up. What did you feel? Asked Jennifer. Pride, so much pride. You were always a sweet, smart, caring girl. I wanted to hug you and tell you I was your sister, but I was also afraid it would change everything between us, explained Margaret. And now? Now that everything has changed? Asked Jennifer. Now I can finally be your real sister, said Margaret. Michael looked at Robert. I want to meet Stephanie and Daniel, and I want to understand why you made the choices you did, said Michael. Michael, I know I have a lot to make up for. To you, to all my children. But I promise I will try, said Robert. Jennifer walked to the window again and looked out. The wedding guests were still outside the church, confused and talking among themselves. What are we going to tell the people out there? Asked Jennifer. The truth, replied Margaret, or at least part of it. Linda checked her phone. It's been 2 hours. People are worried, said Linda. Father Richard offered. I can speak to the guests, say there was a misunderstanding that has been cleared up, but that the ceremony will be postponed, suggested the priest. Postponed until when? Asked Jennifer. Everyone looked at each other, realizing there would be no wedding. Jennifer, you know there can no longer be a wedding between you, said Robert calmly. I know, sighed Jennifer, but it's hard to accept that everything I planned for my life isn't going to happen. Michael approached her. Jennifer, maybe we can't get married, but we can build a new life. Together as siblings, we can help each other through this, said Michael. Jennifer looked at him. Michael, can you really forget everything we felt for each other? Asked Jennifer. I can't forget, but I can transform that love into something different, into a brotherly love, replied Michael. Robert looked at everyone in the room. I know I made many mistakes, but now I want to try to fix what I can. I want all my children to know each other. I want Emma to have the family she deserves. I want Linda to forgive me, said Robert. Linda took a deep breath. Robert, forgiveness will take time. Trusting you again will take even longer. But maybe we can try, said Linda. Try, said. Margaret looked at Jennifer. Jennifer, I know I can't replace all the years we lost, but I can be here now. I can be the sister you always deserved to have, said Margaret. Jennifer began to cry again, but this time her tears were different. They weren't just from sadness, but also from relief. Margaret, all these years you were more than an employee. You were a friend, a confidant. Now I understand why, said Jennifer. Because we are sisters, replied Margaret, hugging Jennifer for the first time as a sister. Michael watched the embrace and felt a mix of emotions. He was losing the woman he loved, but gaining a sister. Robert, said Michael, I want to understand my story. I want to know more about my biological mother, about you, about all my siblings. We'll talk about everything. I promise I won't hide anything anymore, said Robert. Father Richard looked at the group. Would you like me to speak with the guests now? Asked the priest. Jennifer nodded. Yes, Father. Tell them the wedding won't happen, but that we're okay. That it's a family matter that needs to be resolved, said Jennifer. After the priest left, the 5 of them remained silent for a few minutes. Linda broke the silence. Margaret, from today on, you're no longer our employee. You're our daughter and our sister, said Linda. Thank you, Mrs. Linda, but I'd like to keep working. I need the money for Emma, said Margaret. No, interrupted Robert. Emma is my granddaughter. I will pay for her education. You will live with us as our daughter. And if Emma wants to study medicine, we'll support her dream, added Jennifer. Margaret began to cry. I don't know what to say. For so many years I dreamed of this moment, said Margaret. Michael looked at Robert. What about John's family? Do they know the truth? Asked Michael. John came to me once, years ago. He suspected, but never wanted confirmation. He loved you as a son, and that's what mattered to him, explained Robert. They're still my family too. John may not be my biological father, but he's the one who raised me, said Michael. Of course. And now you have two families, said Jennifer. Robert looked at everyone. Next weekend, when Stephanie and Daniel come, and when we bring Emma, we'll have our first family meeting. All together, said Robert. How will that be? Asked Jennifer. Hard at first, admitted Margaret, but necessary. Linda looked at Jennifer's wedding dress. Jennifer, let's go home. You need to get out of that dress and process everything that's happened, said Linda. Jennifer looked at Michael. Michael, will you be okay? Asked Jennifer. I will. And you? Replied Michael. I think so. It's strange, but part of me feels relieved, like a weight has been lifted from my shoulders, said Jennifer. Margaret smiled. It's because now there are no more secrets between us, said Margaret. Robert approached Margaret and hugged her. Daughter, forgive me for taking so long to bring you home, said Robert. Father, what matters is that we're together now, replied Margaret. Michael hugged Jennifer. Jennifer, no matter what happens from now on, you'll always be the most important person in my life, said Michael. For me too, Michael. Just now in a different way, replied Jennifer. Linda watched the embraces and felt that despite all the pain and confusion, something beautiful was being born from that difficult situation. Let's go home, said Linda. We have a lot to talk about and plan. When they left the sacristy, the guests had already dispersed. Father Richard had managed to calm the situation by explaining that there had been a misunderstanding that was resolved. On the way home, each was lost in their own thoughts. Jennifer wondered what it would be like to meet her new siblings. Michael reflected on his identity and his new reality. Margaret felt grateful to finally be able to be who she truly was. Robert carried the weight of his past choices, but also the hope for a better future. Linda tried to process how her family had completely changed in one afternoon. Arriving home, Jennifer went up to her room to change clothes. The wedding dress, which just hours earlier had represented her dreams, now seemed like a symbol of a life that would never exist. Margaret went to the room she had always occupied in the house, but now with a completely different feeling. It was no longer the maid's room, it was the daughter's room. Michael decided to stay for dinner. The family needed to start recognizing itself in this new configuration. During dinner, the conversation was hesitant at first. Margaret, said Jennifer, tell us more about Emma. What is she like? She looks a lot like you at her age. Dreamy, determined. She's excited to meet you, replied Margaret. And does she know about Michael and me? Asked Jennifer. She knows that you found out your siblings. I explained it briefly, said Margaret. Michael looked at Robert. Robert, tell me about Stephanie and Daniel. What are they like? Asked Michael. Stephanie is an architect. She lives in New York. She's always been very mature. She took on responsibilities from an early age. Daniel is an engineer. He works in Denver. He's more reserved, but he has a huge heart, explained Robert. Do they know about me and Jennifer? Asked Michael. Yes. Stephanie was worried about both of you. Daniel thought you must be going through a very difficult time, said Robert. Linda, who had been quiet for most of the dinner, finally spoke. Robert, I need you to promise me one thing. No more secrets. If there's anything else I should know, tell me now, said Linda. Robert held his wife's hand. Linda, I promise. There's nothing else. These are all my children. These are all the situations that happened. From now on, total transparency, said Robert. Jennifer looked at Margaret. Margaret, it's going to be strange to call you sister, said Jennifer. For me too, all these years I dreamed of being able to call you sister, replied Margaret. And now you can, said Michael. In fact, now we're all siblings. The reality of the situation still seemed surreal to everyone. After dinner, Michael got ready to leave. Michael, Jennifer called out as he was leaving, will you come for lunch tomorrow? We can start getting to know each other as siblings. Of course, replied Michael. And Jennifer, thank you. Why? Asked Jennifer. For being so strong, for not hating me, said Michael. "Michael, none of this was your fault or mine. We are victims of circumstances," said Jennifer. After Michael left, Jennifer, Margaret and Linda sat in the living room. "It's surreal to think that this morning I was getting ready to get married, and now I'm finding out I have a sister," said Jennifer. "And I was getting ready for the worst day of my life, having to tell secrets I kept for decades," said Margaret. Linda looked at both of them. "And I was getting ready to gain a son-in-law, and now I found out I gained 2 more children and a granddaughter," said Linda. The three laughed, a nervous laugh, but one that eased the tension a bit. "Mom," said Jennifer, "are you okay? How are you dealing with all this?" "Honestly, I'm still processing it. I'm hurt by your father, but I'm also curious to meet my new children and my granddaughter," replied Linda. Margaret looked at Linda. "Mrs. Linda, can I call you Mom?" asked Margaret. Linda smiled. "Of course you can, my dear," replied Linda, hugging Margaret. Jennifer watched the hug and felt that despite all the pain, something beautiful was beginning to form. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The days that followed were about adaptation. Jennifer went back to work at the clothing store she managed, but her mind was constantly focused on the new family reality. Michael continued with his routine at the accounting office, but he was also absorbed in thoughts about his identity. Margaret, who was now officially part of the family, still insisted on helping with household chores, but Linda made a point of treating her like a daughter, not a maid. On Wednesday, 3 days after the wedding that didn't happen, Robert came home with news. "Stephanie and Daniel arrive tomorrow afternoon," announced Robert. "And Margaret, you can pick up Emma on Friday." Jennifer felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. "What will the first meeting be like?" asked Jennifer. "Natural," replied Margaret. "We're family. We're just getting to know each other." Michael, who had become a constant presence in the Miller house, looked at Robert. "Are you nervous?" asked Michael. "Very. It will be the first time all my children are together," admitted Robert. Linda, who had spent the last few days swinging between anger and curiosity, made a decision. "I'll prepare a special lunch for tomorrow, a family meal," said Linda. On Thursday, Stephanie arrived first. At 28, she was an elegant woman with features that resembled Robert. When she saw Jennifer, she smiled. "So you're my younger sister," said Stephanie, hugging Jennifer. "And you're my older sister." "It's strange to say that," replied Jennifer. "For me too, but I'm happy to meet you," said Stephanie. When Daniel arrived 2 hours later, the dynamic became a bit tense. He was more reserved, greeted everyone politely, but kept his distance. "Daniel," said Robert, "I know it's hard for you." "Dad, it's not hard to forgive you for the children you had. It's hard to forgive you for the years you disappeared from our lives," replied Daniel. Michael observed the interaction and realized that each of Robert's children had been affected differently by their father's choices. During lunch, Margaret told more about Emma. "She's very excited to meet you all, especially Jennifer," said Margaret. "Why?" asked Jennifer. "Because she always wanted to have a young aunt," smiled Margaret. Stephanie looked at Michael and Jennifer. "Are you two handling the situation well?" asked Stephanie delicately. Jennifer and Michael exchanged glances. "We're trying," replied Jennifer. "It's difficult, but we're discovering that love can transform." "Did you have a serious relationship?" asked Daniel. "We were going to get married," replied Michael. "Actually, we were at the altar when we found out the truth." Stephanie and Daniel fell silent for a moment. "That must have been devastating," said Stephanie. "It was," admitted Jennifer, "but maybe it was better to find out before than after." Linda, who had observed the interaction between everyone, finally spoke. "You know you can count on me. I know the situation is complicated, but now we're all family," said Linda. Daniel looked at Linda. "You're not angry with us for existing?" asked Daniel. "At first I was, but now I realize you're also victims of your father's choices. And besides, you're my stepchildren," replied Linda. Robert, who had stayed quiet for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "I know I have a lot to make up for with all of you. I know I was an absent father to Stephanie and Daniel, and that I denied Margaret's existence. I know my omission almost caused a tragedy with Jennifer and Michael, said Robert. Dad, interrupted Margaret, the past can't be changed, but we can build a better future. Margaret is right, agreed Stephanie. We can choose how to move forward. Daniel still seemed hesitant. Daniel, said Michael, I know it's hard to trust again, I'm struggling with that too, but maybe we can support each other. Daniel looked at Michael. You must be confused about your identity, said Daniel. I am. All my life I thought I was the son of John Wilson. Now I find out I have a completely different family, replied Michael. You can have both families, suggested Jennifer. John raised you with love. Robert is your biological father. You don't have to choose. Michael smiled. You're right. And now I have siblings too, said Michael. Stephanie looked around the table. You know, I always felt our family was incomplete. Now I understand why, said Stephanie. And tomorrow we meet Emma, reminded Margaret. Then the family will truly be complete. Linda stood up. I'll prepare the guest room for Stephanie and Daniel. Will you stay for the weekend? Asked Linda. If it's not too much trouble, replied Stephanie. Of course it's no trouble. This is your home too, said Linda. Daniel seemed touched by Linda's kindness. Linda, thank you for welcoming us so warmly, said Daniel. Daniel, you're my stepson. This has always been your home. We just didn't know, replied Linda. That evening, Jennifer and Margaret were talking in Jennifer's room. Margaret, do you think we'll manage to be a normal family? Asked Jennifer. I don't know if normal families exist, laughed Margaret. But I think we can be a happy family. I'm excited to meet Emma, said Jennifer. She'll adore you. You have so much in common, said Margaret. Like what? Asked Jennifer. Determination, kindness, and that way of tilting your head when you're thinking, smiled Margaret. Jennifer laughed. You observed all my gestures all these years? Asked Jennifer. All of them. It was my way of feeling close to my sister, replied Margaret. On Friday morning, Margaret went to pick up Emma in Boulder. The teenager was both excited and nervous. Mom, what if they don't like me? Asked Emma during the trip. Honey, you're amazing. They'll love you, replied Margaret. What if it's awkward? Insisted Emma. It will be awkward at first, for all of us. But awkward doesn't mean bad, said Margaret. When they arrived in Aspen, Jennifer was waiting on the porch. Emma got out of the car and the two looked at each other for a moment. Are you Jennifer? Asked Emma. And you're Emma. My niece, replied Jennifer, opening her arms. Emma ran into the hug, and Jennifer immediately felt a special connection. You're prettier than in the photos, said Emma. And you're taller than I imagined, laughed Jennifer. Margaret watched the meeting with tears in her eyes. Her daughter was finally meeting the family. Linda appeared at the door. And this must be my granddaughter, said Linda, approaching. Emma, this is your grandmother Linda, introduced Margaret. Emma hesitated for a moment, then hugged Linda. Grandma Linda, said Emma, testing the words. Perfect, smiled Linda. Robert appeared next. And I'm your grandfather, Robert, said Robert, somewhat nervously. Emma looked at him curiously. You're the grandpa I never knew, said Emma. Yes, and I deeply regret that, replied Robert sincerely. But you're here now, said Emma, surprising everyone with her maturity. Michael arrived for lunch and was introduced to Emma. So, you're my Uncle Michael, the one who was going to marry Aunt Jennifer, said Emma. Well, the situation is complicated, laughed Michael. My mum explained it to me. You found out your siblings. That must have been a shock, said Emma. It was, admitted Jennifer, but now we're learning to be siblings. Cool, I always wanted to have young uncles, smiled Emma. Stephanie and Daniel arrived shortly after and met Emma. The teenager immediately connected with Stephanie, who began talking about architecture. Do you want to go to college too? Asked Stephanie. Medicine, replied Emma with conviction. A future doctor in the family, said Daniel. Congratulations on your choice. During lunch, Emma talked about her studies and her dreams. I want to study medicine to help people, and I want to study at a good university, said Emma. And you will study, assured Robert. I will pay for your studies. Grandpa, you don't have to, began Emma. Yes, I do. It's the least I can do for my granddaughter, interrupted Robert. Margaret held her daughter's hand. Emma, accept it. It's important to him, said Margaret. Emma looked around the table, seeing all the faces turn to her with affection. Thank you, Grandpa. Thank you, family, said Emma, moved. Linda held Emma's hand. Emma, do you want me to help you choose the university? I can research the best medical programs, offered Linda. Really? You would do that? Asked Emma, excited. Of course, we're family now, replied Linda. Michael looked at the scene and felt a strange sensation. For a moment, he forgot the pain of having lost Linda as his fiancée and focused on the joy of having gained a family. Emma, said Michael, if you need help with math or science, you can count on me. Thank you, Uncle Michael, smiled Emma. Daniel watched everything in silence, still processing how his family had expanded so quickly. Daniel, said Emma, noticing his expression, are you okay? Daniel smiled. I am, Emma. I'm just getting used to having a niece, replied Daniel. And I'm getting used to having 3 uncles, laughed Emma. After lunch, Linda showed the house to Emma. This is your room whenever you want to stay here, said Linda, showing a tidy room. My room? Asked Emma, surprised. Of course, this is your home too, said Linda. Emma sat on the bed and looked around. I never had a room of my own, admitted Emma. Now you do, smiled Linda, and we can decorate it together. Really? Asked Emma, excited. Really? We can go to the mall tomorrow to pick out things, and said Linda. Margaret, who was at the door watching, was moved. Linda, thank you, said Margaret. Why? Asked Linda. For treating my daughter like your real niece, replied Margaret. Margaret, she is my real niece, said Linda. That night, the whole family gathered in the living room. Robert looked around and saw all his children together for the first time. I would like to say something, said Robert, standing up. Everyone paid attention. I know I made many mistakes as a father. I let Stephanie and Daniel grow up without me. I denied Margaret's existence. I almost let Linda and Michael make a terrible mistake. But looking at you now together, I feel that maybe it's not too late to be the father you deserve, said Robert. Dad, said Stephanie, what matters is that we are here now. I agree, said Margaret. The past cannot be changed. Daniel, who had been the most resistant, finally spoke. Dad, I'm still hurt, but I want to try. For me, for my siblings, for Emma, said Daniel. Robert was moved. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you all, said Robert. Linda looked at the gathered family. Robert, despite all the pain your omissions caused, I look at this room and see something beautiful. I see a family, said Linda. Linda looked at Michael. Michael, how are you feeling? Asked Linda. Still confused, but happy. It's strange to say that after everything that happened, but I'm happy, replied Michael. Me too, admitted Linda. It's different from what I planned for my life, but maybe it's better. Emma, who had observed everything, asked, Can I say something? Asked Emma. Of course, dear, said Margaret. I grew up without a family. It was just me, my mother, and my great-aunt. I always dreamed of having a big family. Now I have grandparents, uncles, and even an aunt my age, said Emma, looking at Linda. Everyone laughed. And you know what's the best part? Continued Emma. You chose each other. Even after discovering the truth, you chose to be a family. Emma's words touched everyone deeply. Michael looked at Jennifer. Emma is right. We chose each other, said Michael. And it was the best choice we ever made. Jennifer agreed. Margaret held Linda's hand. Linda, thank you for accepting me as your daughter, said Margaret. Margaret, thank you for taking care of Jennifer all these years, even when you couldn't say who you really were, Linda replied. Robert looked at everyone. So are we officially a family? Asked Robert. We are, everyone answered in unison. Emma clapped. The Miller family is complete, declared Emma. Stephanie laughed. Emma, you should be a diplomat, not a doctor, said Stephanie. I can be both, laughed Emma. Daniel, who had remained serious for most of the conversation, finally smiled. You know, I think it's going to be cool to have a big family, said Daniel. It sure is, Jennifer agreed, and we're going to make a point of getting together regularly. Every month, suggested Margaret. Every month, everyone agreed. Michael looked at Jennifer. Jennifer, can I ask you a question? Asked Michael. Of course, replied Jennifer. Do you regret anything? Asked Michael. Jennifer thought for a moment. No, I regret the way we found out the truth, but I don't regret finding out. And you? Replied Jennifer. Me neither. It's painful, but I feel like I found my true family, said Michael. Linda watched the conversation between Jennifer and Michael and admired their maturity. You're going to be okay, said Linda. We are, Jennifer and Michael agreed. Margaret looked at Emma. Daughter, what did you think of the family? Asked Margaret. Perfect, Emma replied without hesitation. Even with all the mess? Asked Margaret. Especially because of the mess. Families that are too perfect are boring, laughed Emma. Everyone laughed at Emma's answer. Robert stood up. I think we should make a toast, said Robert. With what? Asked Linda. With juice, suggested Emma. I'm still underage. Juice is fine, Jennifer agreed. Linda went to get juice for everyone, and Robert raised his glass. A toast to the Miller family. It may have started in an unconventional way, but it is real and true, said Robert. To the Miller family, everyone repeated, toasting. Emma stood up. Can I make another toast? Asked Emma. Of course, said Robert. A toast to the secrets that were revealed, because now we can be who we really are, said Emma. To the revealed secrets, everyone repeated. Jennifer stood up too. One last toast. To love that changes but never fades, said Jennifer, looking at Michael. To love that changes, everyone repeated, moved. After the toasts, the family kept talking late into the night. They planned future get-togethers, discussed Emma's studies, and began building family traditions. Let's make a family album, suggested Stephanie. Good idea, Margaret agreed. Emma can help organize it. Really? Asked Emma, excited. Of course, said Jennifer. You're the youngest, you can be our official historian. Daniel, who had been quiet, made a suggestion. How about we take a family trip at the end of the year, suggested Daniel. A trip? Asked Linda. Yes, all together. We can rent a big house at the beach or in the mountains, explained Daniel. I love the idea, said Jennifer. Me too, Michael agreed. Then it's decided, our first family trip, said Robert. Margaret looked at everyone and felt a happiness she hadn't experienced in years. Thank you, said Margaret. Why? Several asked at the same time. For finally allowing me to be who I am, for accepting my daughter, for giving me a family, explained Margaret. Margaret, said Linda, thank you for having cared for Jennifer with such tenderness all these years. And thank you for having the courage to tell the truth, added Jennifer. Even if it was at the worst possible time, laughed Michael. It was the right time, corrected Margaret. 1 minute later, and it would have been too late. True, agreed Father Richard, who had come to visit them. Father Richard, exclaimed Jennifer, so glad you came. I wanted to know how you all were doing, and see if you needed any spiritual support, said the priest. We're fine, Father. Better than we imagined, replied Jennifer. The priest looked around and saw the family gathered. Sometimes God allows difficult situations to happen to lead us to a better place, said the priest. Do you think that's what happened? Asked Emma. I think you turned a difficult situation into something beautiful, and that is a rare gift, replied the priest. Robert approached the priest. Father, thank you for allowing the truth to be revealed, said Robert. Robert, I had no choice. I couldn't allow the marriage to happen, said the priest. And you did the right thing, said Michael. Imagine if we found out later. I don't even want to think about it, said Jennifer, shuddering. The priest stayed for dinner and blessed the family before leaving. May God bless this family and protect it always, said the priest. Amen, they all replied. That night, before going to sleep, Jennifer and Margaret talked again. Margaret, do you think we did the right thing? Asked Jennifer. What do you mean? Asked Margaret. Accepting all of this so quickly. Forgiving Daddy, forming a family like this, explained Jennifer. Jennifer, would you rather hold a grudge? Live with anger? Asked Margaret. No, admitted Jennifer. Then we did the right thing. Life is too short to waste on resentments, said Margaret. You are wise, said Jennifer. I'm older, laughed Margaret. Barely, laughed Jennifer back. Jennifer, called Margaret. Yes, replied Jennifer. Thank you for accepting me as a sister, said Margaret. Thank you for being the sister I always wanted to have, replied Jennifer. The two hugged and Jennifer felt that her family was finally complete. In the next room, Michael was talking with Daniel and Robert. Michael, said Daniel, how are you dealing with the change of identity? It's hard, admitted Michael, but it's also liberating. Now I understand where some of my traits come from. Like what? Asked Robert. The stubbornness, laughed Michael. Now I know it's genetic. The three laughed. Michael, said Robert, I want you to know that you can always count on me, as a father. Thank you. And you can count on me as a son, replied Michael. Daniel watched the conversation and felt that maybe it was time to give his father a chance. Dad, said Daniel, I also want to try. I want to get to know you better. Robert got emotional again. Daniel, that means the world to me, said Robert. But it will be a gradual process, warned Daniel. I understand. We have time, said Robert. Michael looked at the two. You know, I think we're lucky, said Michael. Why? Asked Robert and Daniel. How many people get the chance to restart a family in their 30s? Asked Michael. True, agreed Daniel. And with siblings who are already adults, added Robert. It's a second chance for all of us, said Michael. The next morning, Stephanie was getting ready to go back to New York. I don't want to leave, admitted Stephanie. For the first time in years, I feel part of a real family. You can always come back, said Linda. This is your home. And we'll see each other next month, reminded Jennifer. True, smiled Stephanie. And I want to help Emma choose a university. That would be great, said Emma. I need all the opinions I can get. Daniel was also getting ready to leave. Daniel, said Margaret, thank you for accepting me as your sister. Margaret, thank you for having the courage to bring us together, replied Daniel. And thank you for saving Jennifer and Michael from a terrible mistake, Daniel added. It wasn't easy, Margaret admitted, but it was necessary. Michael hugged Daniel. Brother, it was good to meet you, said Michael. For me too. And Michael, take care of Jennifer. As a brother, said Daniel. Always, promised Michael. Stephanie hugged Jennifer. Jennifer, if you need anything, call me. We're sisters now, said Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie. You can also count on me, replied Jennifer. After Stephanie and Daniel left, the house became quieter, but still full of positive energy. Emma decided to stay a few more days before returning to Boulder. Aunt Jennifer, said Emma, can I tell you a secret? Of course, said Jennifer. I've always dreamed of having a family like this. United, that takes care of each other, confessed Emma. And now you have it, smiled Jennifer. And you, aren't you sad you didn't get married? Asked Emma. Jennifer thought for a moment. You know, Emma, at first I was devastated, but now I realize that maybe fate has other plans for me, said Jennifer. What kind of plans? Asked Emma. I don't know yet, but I know they involve taking care of my family. Especially you, smiled Jennifer. Me? Asked Emma, surprised. Of course, you're my niece. I want to help you achieve your dreams, said Jennifer. Emma hugged Jennifer. Thank you, Aunt Jennifer. You're the best, said Emma. Michael approached the two. Can I join the hug? Asked Michael. Of course, Uncle Michael, laughed Emma. The three hugged, and Margaret watched the scene with tears in her eyes. What is it, Mom? Asked Emma. Nothing, dear. I'm just happy, replied Margaret. Linda approached the group. You know, I've been thinking about something, said Linda. About what? Everyone asked. About how we're going to tell this story to people, said Linda. The truth, said Robert. Always the truth from now on. But people will find it strange, said Jennifer. Let them, said Michael. What matters is that we know it's true. And that we're happy, added Margaret. Emma looked at everyone. You know what I think? Said Emma. What? Everyone asked. I think our family is special. It wasn't born in the traditional way, but it was born from love and truth, said Emma. Emma is right, agreed Robert. Our family is special. And unique, added Linda. And strong, said Jennifer. And true, finished Michael. Margaret looked around at everyone. So are we in agreement? We are officially the Miller family, asked Margaret. We are, everyone answered in unison. Forever, added Emma. Forever, everyone repeated. At that moment, Jennifer looked at Michael and felt a peace she hadn't experienced in days. The love they felt for each other hadn't disappeared. It had just transformed into something different, but equally strong. Michael returned her gaze and smiled. They had lost romantic love but gained an entire family. Margaret held Emma's and Linda's hands, feeling finally that she belonged somewhere. Robert looked at all his children gathered and felt that, despite all the mistakes, he might have done something right in life. Linda observed the family that had formed in her home and realized that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as problems. And Emma, the youngest of all, looked around and knew she would never feel alone in the world again. The Miller family had been born from secrets and revelations, from pain and overcoming, but was now united by unconditional love and the conscious choice to be together. A few months later, when friends asked Jennifer how she was handling the cancelled wedding, she would smile and say, "It was the best thing that ever happened to me." And when they asked Michael if he regretted losing Jennifer, he would answer, "I didn't lose Jennifer. I gained a sister for life." Margaret could finally say with pride, "I am Margaret Johnson Miller, daughter of Robert and Linda, sister of Jennifer, Michael, Stephanie and Daniel, and mother of Emma." And Emma, whenever someone asked about her family, would answer with a huge smile, "I have the best family in the world. It's big, complicated, but full of love." End of story. The story of Jennifer and Michael shows us that true love sometimes needs to transform to find its purest form. What did you think of this family that found each other again through truth? Leave your opinion in the comments about the choices each character made. Do you think Margaret made the right decision by revealing the secrets at the time of the wedding? Tell us how you felt following this journey. Thank you for joining us in this touching story. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that touch the heart.